start the sucker up.
Don't waste unrecorded thoughts.
Welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams, editor-in-chief of Hackaday.
And I'm Tom Nardi, managing editor at Hackaday.
This is episode 207. This week we'll be talking modular furniture, plastic prosthetics, and your data on YouTube. This week in the news, we have balloons being shot down over Alaska.
You know, it's funny, we were talking about this in the Discord, and somebody brought up, like, you know, wouldn't it be funny if the Air Force was shooting down somebody's hobby balloons, and we're like, oh yeah, we should have like a contest, and whoever gets their project shot down by NORAD, wins something. And then a few days later, lo and behold, it seems like that's exactly what happened.
The week before we were talking about this, and Jenny's like, if I were some kind of terrorist, I would just start launching these balloons. And this is back when the balloon we were talking about was that Chinese balloon that had a 2,000-pound payload. Oof. And if you're wondering how big a balloon that is, it's a damn big balloon. And I'm like, yeah, sure, Jenny, they'll be doing that because even just the hydrogen fill on that is going to cost you $100,000, just ballpark. And I'm like, there's no way. And then, of course, there are these Pico balloons going up, which can be run up. I mean, the balloons themselves cost like $15. They've got a 20-something gram payload. They don't need much lift at all. They're fantastically cheap and really awesome and very cool. And then this one went dark after something got shot down in Alaska.
Well, it's also kind of remarkable, and I've seen this maybe theorized on some sites that they could even track and shoot down something small is kind of a flex in itself. And that maybe part of the reason they did it was just to, for anybody who might be keeping score, we can definitely see these little things and we can hit them.
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe.
it's like trying to hit a bullseye while you're riding a horse while you're blindfolded. These things are tiny.
Yeah. They're the size of a big inflated beach ball.
Yeah. So to think you could bullseye that with a missile, going Mach 2 or whatever is pretty impressive. I mean, up to this point, I didn't even think they would have had the radar cross section or whatever required to lock onto them. But I mean, obviously their capabilities are beyond what we realize, and I think that might be kind of the point. Whatever you got out there, we can hit it.
What's a Mylar balloon? It's reflective to radio, so it's actually really probably pretty easy to ping with a radar, I guess. But like you said, just the size of them, they're so small that it's pretty astounding. I was first pretty skeptical about it and went digging into this particular Pico balloon a little bit. And it has been now, I think, 7 times around the world. It's been out for 2 and a bit months. It's gone silent before in places where it doesn't get good light or where it's not passing over whisper receivers and things like that. So it's gone silent before for 30 days in a row even. So it's still possible that it wasn't this thing that they shot down and it was something else. And that was my skeptical take on it. But then once the military comes back with this wasn't a hostile target and everything else is actually really pretty much lined up. So it looks like they shot down a Pico balloon. That's so rad.
Do you get any reimbursement from the government if they shoot down your balloon?
Oh, no, this is the trick, right? So if you're flying a balloon over 4 pounds, you have to set out a notice to airmen. And if it goes across international borders, you have to let them know. But if you're flying something so light like this, you're entirely within your right to be flying it. And that makes them in the wrong to be shooting it down.
I do wonder if we might see this as some excuse to have stricter rules against amateur high-altitude payloads or something, too, which would suck.
I would hope not.
I hope not for a lot of things.
Yeah, exactly.
But they still happen, you know what I mean?
True that.
They're even though it's totally our fault for shooting it down, you're not allowed to do that anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't do that anymore. You confused us. It made us look bad on the global stage.
No, I think you're right, though, that it maybe actually makes them look good. Oh, yeah? You want to see us put a bullseye through that? Here we go.
It's like in the old movie where they throw a hat up in the air and they'd shoot it, right? That's
exactly.
That's the equivalent.
Well, I read the craziest scientific paper this week. I'll throw a link in the show notes for you. This was a paper on how loud the SLS Artemis 1 launch was. And the answer is it was hella loud. The take home on this paper is that it was about 20 dB louder than they had modeled it, and that they have to go back and redo their Space Launch System acoustics modeling to update it to match their experimental results. What I think is really neat about this paper is that it shows kind of what they're doing on the measurement stuff. And they have these little boxes with basically Raspberry Pis and calibrated microphones in them. Portable unit for measuring acoustics, Puma. It turns out that the launch was really, really, really loud. And there's all of this like anecdotal / folk wisdom about how loud a Saturn V was. This thing is louder than that for sure. What are they saying? They're saying post-liftoff maximum overall levels at distances of 4 to 5 kilometers approach 130 decibels, nearly 20 dB greater than predicted by environmental assessments. And that's pretty damn loud. That's like, front row of a loud rock concert loud.
Except the front row is 5 kilometers away.
You don't want to be standing next to the thing, I think.
Yeah.
But they also say that all of the kind of hyperbole, that it was loud enough to crack concrete or blow out rainbows or something, was all completely crazy talk. But they actually have the numbers here for you. And in fact, that's part of the purpose of putting this paper out in the open, is that they want to just show you that not only is it not kind of arbitrarily loud, but they know exactly how loud it is because they're measuring it.
And it's worth noting that this is comparatively the quiet rocket, because Starship is going to be even louder, and the Block 2 SLS is going to be even louder. Yeah, even though this is already much louder than the Saturn V, there's even bigger ones coming down in the next, few years. So it's definitely important to have kind of a baseline.
My favorite lines from this paper are, however, because shock-containing noise is described in terms of its, quote, crackle, we looked at, for a reference, the A-weighted level of a bowl of crackling Rice Krispies, fresh cereal after the milk has just been poured, which comes in at 30 decibels. They note that the weighted SLS noise intensity at Station 4 is approximately 40 million times greater than a bowl of audible morning cereal. So, yeah, that's loud. 40 million times louder than a bowl of Rice Krispies.
Like those memes you ever see, it's like, Americans will do anything to not use the metric system. And they, this is roughly 2 fire trucks long or something.
Oh, and speaking of sounds, let's do a What's That Sound?
Might have been the best segue.
That was awesome. How did that happen?
Managed, right?
How did that happen?
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
All right, there we go. Oh, this is very soothing.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to take a nap. Well, it keeps going then, too, doesn't it?
Uh-oh, how long did that let it run?
It's going a long time. I think we're going to hit 30 seconds. There we go. I will say like an organ using PVC pipes or something.
Not bad, not bad. There's a couple extra background sounds in there that'll give our listeners the clues that will nail it. But that's a super good guess, man.
Definitely very relaxing.
If you're out there listening, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. Find the link for the form, enter your best guess and your email address. We'll draw among the correct guesses next week. Get in touch with you and get you a t-shirt if you're the lucky winner. All right, let's head off to hacks. My first hack this week comes from Thomas LeMay. Open Structures is a modular building system for the rep age. And this is one of those like recurring themes that I love, and I kind of wanted to point it out. I think it's also a bit of a pipe dream, and it's one of those things that kind of draws nerds like moths to an open flame. open structures, the idea is that you have a bunch of real world size building blocks so that you can build up a shelf out of it and then take it apart. And then you can build a chair out of it when you need a chair. And then you can take that apart and you can build a bed out of it. And everything is basically set up on this like 20 millimeter hole raster. And I think they're all like M8 bolts. And, the whole thing is like hyper standardized. And it's funny because we keep running into this idea over and over again, including grid beam, I think, which was the one that we saw in the early 2000s. Al Williams was actually trying to remember the name of this one, and we came up with it after a long time. That was one where they had a bunch of standard sized rods with all the holes pre-drilled in them, kind of like an erector set for, again, building furniture size things. And this goes back to like an old 60s hippie idea of living structures. And I don't know what's so cool about this. It is really cool. And I think it is because it's like a play set that you can build real world things out of, and it's easy, and you don't have to drill any holes because it's all full holes to start with.
I mean, I think there's something in human nature that likes to build with modular things.
Yeah, right?
Right? Like there's got to be some kind of reptilian brain thing that explains like our fascination with Lego and that sort of thing. And this is definitely I should say the adult. Although there'll be somebody, adult Lego fan, mad in the comments, but this is sort of the adult alternative to Lego.
It's bigger scale Lego for sure. Yeah, no, and I like that a lot, and I like the idea. But I always start thinking about this, and I'm like, I could do that myself. And I'm like, how many holes would I have to drill? Because if you look at one of these, one of these beams or whatever, and it's got a hole every 2 centimeters, and say it's it's a meter long stick, you're looking at drilling 50 holes there. And then if you need to drill the 90-degree angle holes to that, you're looking at drilling 100 holes in one stick. And then say, if you want a decent sized construction kit of this stuff, you need 20 sticks. You're looking at 2,000 holes all of a sudden. And I'm like, but if I knew where I wanted the holes
yeah, right.
in the beginning, I could just drill like one hole. And then you're back to like not pre-drilling the holes again. And that's where I always fall down on this idea. Plus, of course, it has to be weaker because it's all full of holes. And it has to be like, I look at that joint, what comes out of open structures and grid beam is this really interesting 3-dimensional joint they always do. If you think of like the corner of a table, there's a piece going off in the X, Y, and in the Z direction. And here they just overlap them a little bit longer, and then they run 3 bolts through them in those 3 directions. And that looks like an interesting idea, but I think it's going to wiggle. That's going to be a wiggly joint if there's any play between the holes and the bolts when you set that thing up. And I've always wanted to build one of those. I've always wanted to build something using that style joint just to see if it holds water at all, because it looks like it would be a cool idea, but conspicuously you never see furniture built that way.
Much like Lego, I think it's cool for a quick prototype, but like you said, once you figured out what you want to build, there's more efficient ways to recreate that, and it's kind of interesting that, they mentioned rep wrap here in the title, because I kind of got into an argument with somebody not that long ago about rep wrap. In my humble opinion, I think that the rep wrap thing has kind of petered out, because it's now that we know what a cheap 3D desktop printer should look like, they just crank them out. Like there's no reason to, they just injection mold the pieces, or they, bend the sheet metal or whatever. Like it's cool, the idea that you could print all the pieces and you could, it can make itself. But once you've gotten a few of them and you know what they're going to be, it loses its mystique, and it ends up just being, a less efficient way of making the parts.
I'm 100% with you on that, but like you say, this idea is good for prototyping.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you look through the Open Structures catalog and the Grid Beam catalog, I'm also going to point you to a low-tech magazine, How to Make Everything Ourselves, Open Modular Hardware, where he's got the same idea. you can learn a lot of cool modular reusable construction techniques from all of these. Like the open structures one has a really neat piece that makes 1/3 of a cylindrical joint thing. And so this is good for making like tripod stool legs to be really firm, or a whole bunch of other things. Like, go through these, you will learn something from all of them, even if you don't like buy into the whole modular system. And along those same lines, actually, Eva Miranda came up with a modular giant 3D printed system that he's been working on as well. Got featured last week. Giant 3D printed excavator is awesome, but needs work. And I think that's also cool because he does all of these really gigantic 3D prints, and then what's he going to do with the plastic afterwards? But if he makes the pieces shaped like, giant oversized Lego Technic, he can just undo those and, put them into some other shape. And so for his use case, I think it totally makes sense. But again, watch that video. You'll learn something you want to know for whatever it is you're building. Ditto open structures, ditto all the open modular hardware movement. So give it all a check. It's good, fun stuff, even if I don't believe in its kind of utopian future promises.
So the first project I wanted to talk about this week is admittedly impractical and perhaps against the YouTube terms of service. That's yet to be proven. But the title on this one is YouTube as an infinite file storage. And the idea is that, YouTube lets you upload as many videos about whatever that you choose. So if you were able to encode other kinds of data into the video stream, and assuming that YouTube just doesn't delete your nonsensical videos, you could, in theory, back up as much as you want to this service. There's a lot of practical reasons that's probably not going to work in the real world, but it's an interesting conceptual thing. This one in particular is from Dvorak Dwarf, and it is an open source project that lets you basically turn a file into a black and white, or color, I think, depending on the options, mosaic of little dots, and then run that back through. And, there's some concern about if YouTube squishes the video down too much, you'd lose the fidelity required to decode it. And if people started doing this in mass, you can imagine that YouTube would pretty quickly say, any videos that are just flashing pixels need to be deleted. Definitely the kind of thing that'll probably work once or twice and then not anymore. But you don't have to do the video on YouTube. And that's kind of what got me interested. And it is mentioned, in the write-up that there was back in the day a device you could buy that lets you store data on regular VHS tapes, one between your computer and the VCR, and it did a very similar thing. It would take a file and make it something low res enough you could put on a VHS. I think I had read somewhere like a regular VHS tape could hold something like 4 gigs or something. It's like something surprisingly decent if you think about, the era that somebody would have been doing this. With this software, you could definitely spin that up if you wanted to experiment with storing data on any kind of tape you have. And it's interesting because tape backup is one of those things where it never really got mainstream, I guess, enough to get cheap. So, they're a lot of money. If you ever look at, what a tape drive and media costs, it's ridiculous. No one has their own tape drive, even though it'd be really nice, to have, this mass storage on a stable medium. So, maybe through this technology, we could kind of get a DIY version. I don't know that I'd trust any critical stuff on a VHS tape, but it'd be worth experimenting with, I think.
Oh, that's a great idea. It's funny you mentioned whether they degrade it or not because, I kind of have a weak internet connection here. And so I'm watching this thing and it starts off in super low resolution.
Right.
And I'll have to put the picture in the show notes because if you want to see what random noise looks like when it's run through JPEG image processing at very low bandwidth, I'll show you. It's really cool. It's actually... These are kind of all of the primitive two-dimensional luminosity fields. Like, this is what Fourier transforms look like, people, and I'm looking straight at them. It's really pretty awesome. But then I kept watching for a bit, and they started pushing more data, and it caught up with me, and I started getting the video in real quality, and you can see every bit in it. So yeah, maybe this is a viable way to store your data.
And then somebody in the comments said they had a very similar one, a very similar project that's up on I/O, also intended for YouTube, but it's the same kind of thing. What I like with their software, though, is, and this is from Duncan on I/O, there actually turns it into a series of QR codes. You know,
Ooh,
so instead of that
yeah.
full screen random noise looking thing, you have like a QR code for whatever, how many frames, and then it keeps switching them out. And then, of course, you have the built-in like redundancy and that kind of stuff that comes with QR. So that's kind of an interesting approach too. I would think that would be a much, if I was going to store something on VHS tapes, I would probably do the QR version, because one, obviously the resolution's a lot lower, and you're going to get tracking issues and stuff on VHS, so you'd want to have that integrated error correction and redundancy.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, you have the problems with tape, which is that, you know, you have to run the whole thing out. You can't just, like, you know, get a file in the middle. But, you know,
Right.
if you had something that you didn't want to lose, and you wanted to have a relatively stable backup for, and you didn't mind running the whole tape out to do it, you know, it's an option. I'm not going to say it's a great option, but it's an interesting option.
My next hack is let machine learning code an infinite variety of Pong games. This is Pongfinity. This is fantastic. This is the work of Jose Antonio Garcia Pero. He got OpenAI codecs to complete Pong games for him in MicroPython, and then flashes it to a Pico and a little LCD display. What's really cool about this is, of course, like all of this AI complete it for me stuff, is that the hard work is in generating the prompts right. And so he includes, for instance, the MicroPython libraries he's likely to need, rudimentary code stubbing out the buttons and the screen driver and things like this, and then tries to describe the game of Pong well enough that codecs can then just take over and write the rest of the game for him. Now, I love this as an experiment to see like what you can get done that actually might work using one of these AI machines. He says he gets about 80% of the time a working Pong game out of it, although a good percentage of the time it's weird. And that is like the colors are wrong, or the ball's the wrong size, or it starts out in the wrong place, or, you know, it has an idea of what Pong is, but it never quite gets it right, but it always gets it different. And I think that's by itself kind of cool. So I think this is much more of a like learning to use codecs sort of experiment than practically how would I actually program Pong. He's written a lot more in his prompts and included all the right libraries and described all the right hardware than it would have taken to write Pong himself, first of all. But like, that's not the point. The point here is probing the new technology and seeing what it can do and what it can't do. And for instance, one thing that's really neat is, of course, it doesn't have any idea of global versus local variables. And so it gets confused between variables it defines in block scope and then in global scope. And so he's had to tweak his prompts to, you know, suggest that this one needs to be implemented as a global and this one needs to be not. And that's helped out the AI tremendously. His conclusion is more or less 50% of the time works fine and the other 50% is crazy. It kind of works-ish, sort of.
I kind of misjudged this one at first. I didn't realize this was running on a microcontroller, which makes that a lot more impressive.
It's running on a wireless microcontroller.
Yeah,
it makes
that,
the
right.
HTTP request. He's got his like codecs token in there, and he just presses a button on the microcontroller. It submits a request for its new code and then just runs it. And that's the other thing that's like ballsy about this. He's actually downloading computer written code and running it on his microcontroller with no say. He's just like, psh, I press the button, it makes the code, I run it.
Come what may, right?
That's how you get code that just doesn't work.
I think it's kind of funny that the game that was, famously not written with code in the first place and done with all, chip level logic is now being generated with hundreds of lines of code, not even written by humans. So I guess you could still say it's not being written. It's not been written by a human. It's been written by something else.
One of the things I think that's been helping ChatGPT in kind of pulling the wool over people's eyes, frankly, is that we like to see human intention in things. And when we see these things, we kind of give them the benefit of the doubt a little bit. Something that's really real about this Pongfinity project here is that there's no human interpretation at all. He just downloads this code and runs it. He's not fixing it up. I mean, he's worked his prompts to get them as good as they possibly could be. And so he's spent a significant amount of time making what he gives the machine enough that it can give him back something that runs 80% of the time. It works all the time. But I think it's really honest here in a way that, like, when I read a machine-generated paragraph, I'm like, this is a little clunky, this is a little boring, this is a little repetitive. But I give it the benefit of the doubt, right? Whereas here, there's no benefit of the doubt. Pong runs or Pong doesn't run.
Do you think missed opportunity to call it Pong GPT? Is that what we're doing now? Everything's GPT?
You are missing any opportunity. You don't call anything something GPT.
Well, my next one comes our way from Big Clive, which admittedly means probably a lot of you have seen it already, but I think it's still worth talking about. It turns out that there are unscrupulous people on the internet. I don't know if you knew this. Because of the pandemic, there is a lot of demand for affordable CO2 monitors. You want to make sure areas are ventilated properly. Some folks have picked up on this demand and are putting out some highly questionable devices through the usual low-cost sources. I guess Clive got word of these and wanted to, check out, what's in one of these little cheapy CO2 monitors. What do you get for your money? Not a CO2 monitor. It's the short version of this. It was literally fake. What's interesting is, if I was going to fake a CO2 monitor, it would just be lights in a box, and the hell with them. When they figure it out, what are they going to do? I'm some nameless overseas company. This isn't that. And in fact, on closer inspection, it appears to be a functional device. It just doesn't do what it claims to do because the sensor is not a CO2 sensor. It's actually an alcohol sensor. And everything works on the board. I mean, it's a functional alcohol sensor, but the screen says CO2, so they, perhaps, and that's something like, Clive kind of talks about, like maybe they were already selling this alcohol sensor. Like obviously a lot of work went into it, right? It wasn't, this is the most complex fake that you could have because if you wanted to be fake, it could have just been a paperweight. So maybe they already had these alcohol sensors and they just said, well, we'll make a quick buck by slapping it, because it's an LCD screen that clearly has CO2 on it, right? So like the screen had to be made custom. It's not like it's not a sticker that says CO2. So they went through the trouble of having this LCD made and then paired it with a functional device, just not the device you thought you were getting. It's sad in a way. First of all, it's sad that there are companies out there that would, knowing there's a legitimate medical need for this kind of thing, that they would sell something like this, which is, it literally is evil because you're thinking, oh, cool, we're going to make sure our area is well ventilated with these things that got off eBay and they don't actually work, like part of them still didn't want to just send you a box of rocks. It's very strange. There's also the just missed opportunity, right? Because it wouldn't have taken so much to make the thing that they promised you in the first place. You've already got the hardware in there. It's very bizarre. It's if I was going to scam somebody, this isn't the way I would do it.
Now, there are some comments, and I can't speak to this at all. There are some comments where they say this isn't a fraud, it's a VOC sensor. And then maybe it's not a direct CO2 sensor, but instead it's a VOC sensor. And you can infer, if you have a good baseline on that, you can then infer how much CO2 is in the atmosphere. So maybe that's possibly true. And so this is Ian and Reluctant Cannibal, both piling on this one in the comment section. And if that's right, it's an indirect measure of CO2 sensor.
You could infer a CO2 level by checking the VOC. Well, so all right, it's still.
Yep. And so if CO2 is correlated with the VOC level, then you can do this correlation and do it, I guess, right?
So it's never going to be a good CO2 monitor. Well, if that's the case, I'd be interested because I'm sure Clive will do another video testing that. You know, I mean, he's done that in the past, whether it was he made a mistake or just, misjudged something. He'll certainly revisit it and, give it its due. So it'd be interesting to see if you're patient enough, will this thing actually do what it's supposed to? Yeah. It's very good at detecting whiskey or whatever because it does that right away in the video. I like in the end he kind of says it's a party detector because it'll definitely tell you if a bunch of people are drinking in the room.
I mean, if you're using it to say, should I open the window or not, then yeah, you should probably open the window either way, whether it's high VOCs or high CO2. I think one possible way to phrase the question is of whether this thing's a fake or not is whether it would make you take the right action. And if there's too much, crud in the air and you're going to open the window, does it really bother you that it's CO2 or some other volatilized organics, right? I mean,
it's a very zen question.
It's still kind of fake, but imagine it makes you take the same actions, right? It's like the Turing test for whether this is a CO2 sensor. Bringing up the rear, my last hack today, a better playlist shuffle algorithm is possible by Ron Miller. And he wrote us in the tips line directly, very emphatically, suggesting that we needed to switch over to his playlist shuffling algorithm. Basically, his complaint is that if you upload your playlist to the cloud and you try to play it back, you get dupes far too often. You get the same songs too often, and that's annoying. And this would happen if you were just drawing randomly from your playlist as if it were just like a pool of songs, right? There's always a chance that you'll get the same song in there twice. And his claim is that what you want to do instead is you want to take the whole playlist, shuffle it once, and then step through that. And then when you get to the end, you want to shuffle it again and go through that again. Whether that's the way you like to listen to music or not, I can't answer. But he's got a kind of clever solution for how to do that. If you were running Spotify and you thought about having to keep everybody's shuffled playlists, that's a lot of data storage. And so what he does instead is he just invents a kind of totally ad hoc, full of magic random numbers, bad random number generator as an indexer, and then just steps through it. So like he goes, now you play song number 3, now you play song number 3 times this funny prime number modulo the number of songs in your data set times some other prime number. And, so he does this kind of like bad old school random number generator routine, and then just picks the next one like that. Except he's picked the numbers to be relatively prime so they don't repeat. And that's basically the gimmick here, is that he's got 2 gear wheels turning with a lot of teeth in them, but because they have relative primes, they don't ever come back around until they've made their one big whole loop through. And so that's his idea, is now you've got a fixed, crazy shuffle order. You only have to index where you are in this crazy shuffle order. And I think that's actually pretty clever in a way. I think if you wanted to do this, the easy and obvious way to do it is to use a linear feedback shift register. It has enough bits to accommodate however many songs are in your data set. And that's pretty easy to do with like 32-bit. But there's a million ways to skin this cat. I think what some of the people in the comments point out is probably the sad truth, which is that Spotify isn't randomly playing stuff on your playlist anyway. They're playing the things that they make the most money by playing for you. And I don't think any of these so-called random shuffle routines are actually random if the counterparty that's doing the random shuffling can make money by shuffling it one way or the other.
Speaking of the comments, it does say that apparently there are players that do this kind of thing. This seems to be, his kind of homebrew formula, but there are ones that do take like a more weighted approach to it. Because like you said, say you had 100 songs and you just pick a random number, there's a decent chance over the course of a day or whatever, you're going to hit the same one. So I guess this is a problem that people have been thinking about. I listen to Soma FM streams, so
exactly,
it's all random to me. Having music on your hard drives seems a little antiquated to me, but I'm different strokes for everyone. So it's funny because in the write up, it's like the randomizer can often be as simple as song index equals random parentheses number of songs, which is definitely how I would have done it.
Yep.
Like if somebody was like just play a random song, I would have done that. I would random number within the range of 0 to how many songs, done.
Speaking of other crazy things that people did to shuffle their music back in the days of having music on hard drives, John H. brings this up in the comments that what his ideal shuffle would be one that plays 3 songs in a row from any album and then jumps to another random album and then plays 3 songs in a row and does this again. I actually wrote this. And I'm going to go see if I can get the code off of an old hard drive somewhere. Because back in the early 2000s, I had a routine called 3play.py. It was one of the first things I ever wrote in Python, I think. And it would pick these random numbers and feed them to my music player daemon, which was what was playing music in my house at that time, and would do exactly that. Like literally exactly that. 3 songs was my chosen number in a row. It was too funny. I'm going to have to find this code and put it up somewhere because apparently there's tremendous demand for it in the world. Like John H. in the comments has demanded it. I'll have to go find it. I haven't used it in, 10 years, 15 years, who knows how long. But honestly, that was the optimal shuffle. What's funny is that somebody suggests something like this in the comments and I'm like, oh, dude, I wrote that. I have to go get that.
I think, oh, dude, I wrote that was the original name for GitHub, but they changed it.
Changed it.
It still works like that, though. I wrote that. All right, so my last one for the week is arguably the most important one. In hindsight, I should have talked about earlier. This is Precious Plastic Prosthetics, and this is a story that comes our way through the Precious Plastic project, which we've covered before, and that's kind of just the hope that we can do localized plastic recycling, and they've showed different ways to do small-scale injection molding and how to chop up plastic, and there's a group of folks who really want to make plastic recycling a reality because in many places it's just going in the garbage. They are reporting on a group in Indonesia who are using locally recycled plastic to make prosthetic legs. And we've talked about this before. There's probably few things more noble you can do with your skill and expertise than, making a limb for somebody, right? And you can, change somebody's whole life with a little bit of effort. So it's really cool to see them do this, and there is a lot of question about reusing plastics and what exactly do you make out of the reused plastics. And, it's one thing to chop up a bunch of plastic and heat it and make it into a sheet, but then okay, what do you do with it? Then that's kind of the question that sometimes doesn't get answered. We get real caught up in the method, but then how do you apply this stuff, and like I said before, we've written up, Precious Plastic, they were making like cell phone cases out of it. It's like, okay, sure. Like you made a cell phone case out of what sure. That's fine. Fine. But like, this is something that is, it's literally life-changing. And especially in areas where medical care is limited, or they couldn't afford a commercially made prosthetic. I mean, this is big. It's far more practical. We've seen a lot of like 3D printed prosthetics. I think that's what we were talking about last time, and that's cool. Here where we have that kind of access to 3D printers, but this is something that can be done pretty much anywhere you have heat and patience and a way to grind up plastic. Basically, the methodology is real simple. They grind up the plastic, they make a sheet out of it, they heat it, they form it into a cylinder, and with a little custom work, it fits on the person's leg. it's just a very positive story and something that it's good to see. We cover a lot of theoretical stuff, right? And we cover a lot of making your furniture out of modular parts. Like you said, these are a lot of like very high concept things. So to see some real life changing stuff happening is really cool.
What I think is really amazing about this video, and not to take anything away from the prosthetics application, is that they've got in the background, while they're doing these interviews, 100 different other recycled plastic applications running that actually also look good. Like, they've got a demo of them making a recycled plastic sink bowl. They're making these like big sheets of, probably inch thick, 2 and a bit centimeter thick sheets of plastic that then they can do, whatever the heck they want with. They make them into cutting boards, make them into, because they're thermoformable, you can fold them up and make them into this prosthetic leg, but they can make them into a whole bunch of other things. Like they have the guy's sitting on a stool that's made of recycled plastic. And it's one of these things where you're like, if you look around my office, there's 100 3D printed things everywhere. If you look around these people's workshop, they're like telling you about this prosthetic leg they made, but the guy's sitting on a recycled plastic stool and behind him is a dude making sinks and motorcycle seats and, you name it. Anyway, this is really cool. This is actually super inspiring to see not just the prosthetic leg application here, but like just all the other things they're doing with it. That's pretty darn cool. Worth noting, they're also they have a nurse on staff who's like good at doing amputee and diabetic wounds and things like that. So they're not just kind of like hacker winging it. They've also got some medical professionals in here too. Looks like they're doing everything right. My first quick hack this week is Tidy Breadboard Uses Banana Bread by Jakob, aka Testudor. This is a cool design. The banana bread in question are little Banana Jack breadboard adapters. And I love Banana Jacks because just the way they plug and unplug just feels so sweet. But this is a breadboard adapter for a row of these little custom-made circuit boards. Jakob's made it out of milled aluminum. You don't have to. Just this very idea of cutting out a modular space at the top of your breadboard to screw whatever it is you need in is really cool. Next up, new product, the Raspberry Pi debug probe coming from, Raspberry Pi. This is a cute project. $12 gets you cables and an SWD debugger programmer and a serial port all in one. So it's kind of everything you need. This comes out of some open source projects, in particular Dappermine. Of course, you can make one of these yourself out of a Pi Pico because it's based on an open source project. But for the extra upcharge, you get all the cables. But I want to make one of these myself, and I want it Wi-Fi. Next up, X Labs, a low power challenge entrant. Weather station runs for months thanks to e-ink display. This is one of the types of projects we totally expected to see. It runs 60 days on a charge. It wakes up every 5 minutes, checks the time, gets new weather data in every 15 minutes, and a new forecast every 2 hours, and displays it all on an e-ink screen. And my fourth of 3 quick hacks is from Stack Smashing, reverse engineering the Apple Lightning connector. Stack Smashing's videos are always so good, and this is the beginning of a series into taking apart Apple's Lightning connector and protocol, reverse engineering it. Right now, he's just got it man in the middling, the 8 data lines. You should totally watch this series.
So my first quick hack is DIY mini fridge is pure brilliance in foam. And I know that you can't really make a good refrigerator Peltier module. We know this. We all know this. And yet I can't stop wishing and can't stop being impressed by these attempts to make a little bench side refrigerator or cooler, more accurately. And this one's really cool. It's all made out of foam. It looks like a little refrigerator. It has lights. It's very well put together. If you have a need to waste a lot of energy to keep 2 cans sort of lower than ambient, this could be one for you. Next up is Travel the World, looking for retro tech virtually. I kind of cheated because I wrote this one, but this one is about a really cool project that's I think only been out for like a week or two. It's called Retro Directory by Rob Smith Dev. This is a community database of anything retro related, and that could be like an old school arcade. It could be a museum. It could be an event. Like a swap meet kind of thing. The default view is this Google Maps looking kind of thing where you can browse around the globe and see everything with these little dots, but there's also a text-based version that Rob says will actually run on a vintage browser, which is really cool. And I know personally, I always feel like these are the kind of events that you hear about the weekend after they've happened, right? Like this, there's so many of them going on by so many different groups, and there's not really like a unified thing that keeps track of them all. So I really hope the community gets on board with this, and more people start putting their thing. You can put your own event in there. You don't have to. Don't be shy. It asks you, like, are you hosting this event? So I think it'd be a really cool resource. And then last up for me is watch Sony engineers tear down Sony's VR hardware. This is really cool to me. This is a trend we're starting to see from some companies where you get like an official teardown video. I'm not sure why they do it. I'm just happy they do it. I don't know what the benefit is for Sony to pay their engineers to record a video of them taking the thing apart and explaining it. I'm just happy they did it. I'm pretty sure the PS5, they did a similar video for the Steam Deck. There's an official teardown video. It's becoming a thing now. When these new like game system come out, they do a teardown video. And I'm not going to ask too many questions. I just hope more companies get on board with tearing their stuff apart and showing it to us, because they have the insight, right? It's interesting to see how it's built, but the commentary from the people who actually made it are what really make it worth watching.
All right, that brings us to the can't miss articles. These are long form pieces written by our fantastic Haggaday writing staff. This week I picked Jonathan Bennett's How to Build Jenny's Budget Mixing Desk. I thought this was such a funny story because a few weeks ago, Jenny had this crazy idea to put together a bunch of horrible USB microphone adapters and try to make a mixing desk in software on her Linux computer, and had more trouble doing it than she thought, and was like, this ought to be possible. Jonathan sees this and is like, oh, I know I can do that, because he's been playing around with Linux's Pipewire infrastructure a lot lately, and Pipewire is part of the key to making this work. In particular, the problem Jenny was facing is that she had sound coming in from 5 of these crappy little USB sound cards. Getting them all to run like sample per sample, time locked together, is virtually impossible. Pipewire, on the other hand, takes whatever audio it has coming in and resamples it on the fly. And so it's already doing this. And that makes what was kind of the worst problem with Jenny's setup a solved problem. And that's really cool. And that was Jonathan's main input here. His next idea, of course, then is that a mixing desk isn't a mixing desk without having a bunch of slidey faders on it. And so he makes himself a really quick slidey fader box. And you should check out that picture. It makes me appreciate how good my carpentry has become, because that is some janky cutting there, Jonathan. But an awesome device. And what it is 6 sliders and 6 buttons, and all of it just has an Arduino underneath it. He links in the code he uses to make this. There used to be a day long ago when writing custom USB MIDI devices was hard. Not anymore. He just include control surface library, and then that's it. The rest of it is just defining which pins everything goes in on. Fan-freaking-tastic. The last bits of this article are him connecting up then this like hardware peripheral he's made to the virtual mixers inside the computer. And he does that both using the kind of top level jack mixer, but because he also uses the Ardor digital audio workstation software to do his mixing, recording, and all sorts of other funny audio processing, you can send the data coming in from his custom peripheral straight into Ardor and have it do that too. And he demos that out for you as well. All in all, this takes kind of a silly idea that is combining a whole bunch of USB audio sources together with a tiny little bit of hardware, a bunch of pots and an Arduino, and turns it into, I think, something more even than the virtual mixer that Jenny had in mind when she wrote the Ask Hackaday piece a few weeks ago. I do have to say, Jonathan's written an article about Pipewire before, and that was 2 years ago, and it's made leaps and bounds since then. I've installed it on my computers. I can attest to his proselytizing about it. It works. It's great. It's making Linux audio a lot more sane than it ever has been, and a lot more flexible too at the same time. So definitely check it out if you are on the Linux side of things and at all into playing with audio.
What I really like about this one is, Jonathan, he was like almost a little bit on the fence at first. He was like, it would be cool if I built the thing that Jenny was trying to build and show how it's done, and that was cool. Absolutely. It was cool. Like, I think that's great because I think it kind of, as much as we try to use the royal, editorial we on many of our posts, contributors to Hackaday do come from all over the place and all over different backgrounds and different, strengths. And it is cool to see how two different writers approach the same thing. It's not a competition. It's not like Jenny was going to get mad that Jonathan wrote this or that stoked. Right. It wasn't like, it's inappropriate because, we already wrote this up and we don't want, somebody to feel like, no, it's great that he was able to bring his practical experience forward. I mean, it was an Ask Hackaday, right? Like, yeah, we're allowed to answer ourselves, like the question was posed and Jonathan came up with the answer. So that's really cool. I'd like to see that more. I've in the past had kind of like counterpoint articles that are like, well, I saw this on Hackaday and I didn't agree with it, so I'm gonna write my own one, right? So it's really cool from that aspect and showing that Jonathan is more than the security guy. I was not going to mention the woodworking. I'm no old Yankee workshop or whatever, but I think we all know how hard it is to make a good front panel. I think we've covered that before, and there's no shame in it. I have certainly had similar looking outcomes.
It's not made out of cardboard. It looks better than like half of mine.
Yeah, I do appreciate though that like he went through the trouble of like scribing these little pencil lines, and then it was like, but all I got to cut the wood is this butter knife, It's just like he planned it all out. He's like, well, I'll do what I can do, but all in good fun. Obviously, he did a really good job here, and it's a lot more intricate setup than I've ever done doing Linux audio. So my hat's off to him. So my can't miss is from Al Williams this week, and this is actually the latest in a new column he's started called Retro Gadgets, and we like old weird stuff here at Hackaday, so it's a little surprising that it's taken us this long, frankly, to have a Retro Gadgets column, but in it, Al looks at weird old gadgets that you may or may not have heard of and does a little bit of a deep dive. And this week it is Nintendo Rob Wanted to Be Your Friend. If you're of a certain age, you might remember that Nintendo sold a little robot that came with for the Nintendo Entertainment System back in 85. This is post the video game crash, when everybody was very skeptical about video games, and there was this idea that, well, maybe if we offer this weird robot, it'll be a toy, right? Like, so like it's not just a video game, it's also a toy, and maybe we'll get out of that. There was this perceived notion that like video games weren't going anywhere, which is kind of funny to think about now how but hey, there's been some bad calls all throughout history, right? So they said, okay, we'll make this little robot and it'll react to the game and add value to the system. And in the end, it did not. I didn't realize until reading this that there was only 2 official games that worked with it. I would have thought they'd try a little bit harder than that. And of course, it's also one of these things, it works off the CRT, like the light gun. So I suppose you can't even use this thing now. It's interesting that they tried to redefine video games a little bit with this thing, right? So that's kind of worth talking about. But it was interesting to me because what happened to the home robots? In the 80s, like they thought this was like a good idea. Like everybody wants a little robot at home. And I remember there's all kinds of robotic toys from back. It was the tracked thing.
Oh,
program
Big
the
Track.
courses. Big Track.
Yeah.
There's all these like cool robotic things that were coming out around then, and you would assume that if you were following that trajectory today, we'd all have little R2D2s following us around, and it just didn't seem to happen. It just didn't seem to happen. That's kind of interesting to look at this. There's nothing I can think of on the market like this, and I mean it's not a great example, but like at least they tried in the 80s to have a TV connected robot that would play games with you. So it's interesting to see that didn't really continue. Maybe it was because they saw stuff like this and it didn't seem like it connected with kids or whatever. But there was a lot of promise back then for this robotic future that unfortunately never arrived.
I totally missed out on this somehow. I mean, I played on the original NES from that era, and I've never seen one of these robots in action. It was really funny. Actually, my son has been playing a lot of Smash Brothers, and Rob is a character in Smash Brothers, and I had no idea where that came from. So this was like
this weird robot guy.
Yeah, right? This is totally mind-opening to me. And then I went digging into some of the things in the comments, and people are still hacking on this robot today, and it's really cool, actually. They've figured out the blink commands that the TV would send out, and there's a video here by Brian Parker where he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 10 Robs all synced together doing like a Christmas dance. It is pretty radical. So, there is some life left in this thing. Someone else made a set of goggles that you could put over its eye, and instead of having to worry about blinking a CRT screen that you don't have anymore, it just blinks an LED at the Rob. So you can leave your Rob entirely stock and just put like this blinders with an LED and I think a Bluetooth chip in it so that you can remotely control the thing over Bluetooth by blinking an LED at it. That's really cool. It's a really neat looking toy, and if they weren't 80s plastic and ultra cheap engineering and stuff like this, I'm sure there would be more of them on the market today to play with. I wonder if they're expensive on eBay or what.
Well,
now you gotta look it up.
Yeah, right.
Hagaday's own Joshua Vasquez has been playing with one of these things and kind of modeling it in SolidWorks and stuff in case you want to make your own. I don't think he has the mechanics of it worked out yet, though, so that's something you would have to work on. But it's got the basic outlines of how it would work. And honestly, on the inside, what is it? It's a microcontroller and a few motors. So you can do that.
So the answer is yes, they're very expensive.
Oh, damn it.
They're very expensive.
I guess I shouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, busted ones are going for $150.
Yeah, boo.
In box, you could.
I don't know. Don't inbox me. I'll take one broken and fix it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Take it apart anyway.
All right, fair enough.
But yeah, I mean, I think that kind of, like you said, people are still messing with it. It speaks to that there is a desire for this kind of thing, like these little domestic robots that we can fiddle with and play with, and the fact that there's still such demand for this ancient one that is not, like you said, not particularly advanced. Clearly there's people out, and maybe it's not a group that's big enough to market a Rob for the 21st century. Maybe it's always going to be too underground for that. But I mean, people clearly want this kind of thing and they want to play with it, and they're willing to pay hundreds of dollars for a device that may be older than they are to get to it. So Maybe there's still life left in it yet. Maybe that'll be Nintendo's new big idea for the next generation. The return of Rob.
And that wraps it up for this week's Hackaday podcast. Thanks for listening. If you want to follow the links or take part in the conversation, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. If you see anything cool or do anything cool, write us an email, tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
keep on hacking. It would be cool. I wonder if I got a VCR somewhere.
And shows it. What's display? Displays it on an e-ink display.
I usually call them e-ink panels.
It doesn't screen anything. Boom. That's a Riz app, I think. Oh man, this one's gonna get nerdy.